All right. I am here with Rob Basso, the CEO of Basso on Business. How's it going, Rob?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me today, Steve.
Yeah, I'm excited to unpack your successes. But before we get there, let's start with your background. How did you get into business?
Well, when I graduated college, I was a history education major, and I was going to take the world by storm by being the best social studies teacher ever. Well, that didn't work out as planned. I found out I didn't really want to go to that same room for 30 straight years. It just wasn't built in my DNA. And to be quite frank, it didn't reach my earnings potential. So I was working in a deli in an office building, and I wrapped my resume in all of the sandwiches that I was making. And I got a job in sales and marketing, and it started my career path in the payroll and human resources business. I've never looked back. I've done it my entire career.
Very nice. Very nice. So let's talk about the first real kind of venture on your own. What was it and how did it work?
So when I worked for the first payroll and human resources company that hired me right out of that deli, I was their top salesperson in a very short period of time, in the first probably about 14 months there, beating all the senior folks that were there. But honestly, I felt I was underpaid and underappreciated. I always believed that it should be on merit, not on your length of term with an organization. Even though I was only 21, 22 years old, I didn't want to start my career really, having those rules put in place for me or those limitations put in for me. So I went out and I quit, and I found an investor, and we started a company when I was about 22 and a half years old that I had for 20 years. And it was a company called Advantage Payroll Services in the New York metropolitan area. And it was a pretty significant concern. We grew the company to a $25 million company before exiting.
Nice, nice. And what type of metrics were you guys tracking? I think that's always a really important piece as you're growing to 25 million. What type of metrics are you mainly tracking other than that 25 million number?
Well, clearly top line revenue, but our margins, our gross margins were really important to us, and every year we tried to improve those to make sure that we were continuing to streamline the best that we possibly could. But we also measured our own employee retention to make sure that we were training them well, to make sure that our clients were really happy. And if people were leaving us en masse or not having long stints with us, we saw that as our problem. That was our mistake, meaning we didn't train them well enough. Maybe we hired the wrong person. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It means that we probably made a mistake somewhere in the hiring process. And I think a lot of organizations don't pay quite enough attention. Oh, this person comes and goes. Doesn't matter. We'll just get a replacement. I think it's a big deal to have consistency, especially when you're dealing with somebody else's money, when they know they can call Sue, when they know they can call Michael, and that's the person that they're assigned to. It made a big difference. Plus, it made a difference compared to our big global competitors that were multi-billion dollar companies that when you call, you got whoever you got on the phone. And what we found is tracking that employee metrics of our own turnover and employee quality and happiness. It was a big deal, and it made a difference to the eventual sale of the business.
Very cool. And that's a good segue into preparedness. What are some things for people listening? What can they do to prepare their business early on, later on, as they're getting ready to exit?
Well, I think I thought about the sale of my business from the day that I started it. And I believe that most people are so consumed with the minutia and the running of everyday business and the catastrophes that happen along the way that somehow they lose sight of really making that plan. And some of that plan is making sure that you are also part of the brand. And I know sometimes people think that, oh no, I want my brand to stand alone. I want the company name to be the only important thing. Me as the leader, I want to be in the background. I don't need people to know who I am. The company is what matters. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly. And I did even 20 years ago when I started the business, that I know I built my company on the back of my personal brand. People do business with people that they know, like, and trust, assuming they have the right product at the right price and that fits. That's a given. You have to have a product or a service that is competitive in the marketplace. But to be quite frank, my software and the things that we did were just okay. They weren't necessarily the best in class, but my customer service was, and the way that I portrayed my company and myself in the marketplace made people want to do business with me. So the first thing they could do is make sure that their personal brand is intact and their personal integrity is intact. And sometimes that gets lost when you're hustling and running every day. You make errant statements, you make remarks, you make mistakes in the marketplace, and that ultimately damages the long-term value of the company. Now, I spent a bunch of time talking about the individual leader in the organization, but clearly the basics need to be, prepared for. Your books and records need to be in pristine shape. And the only way to really do that is do it from the beginning. I can't tell you how many consultations I've had with people over the years where their own finances, even if they're in the financial business, are a wreck. They can't pull their P&L. They don't know how much money, they don't even know how much money they make. And that kind of thing boggled my mind when I started doing outside consulting to understand that most entrepreneurs really are not great at that part of the business. And the ones that really get it, they hire or they outsource it to make sure that stuff works really well. So you get your personal brand, you got your finances in order, and that you have consistent growth in the marketplace. And consistent growth doesn't necessarily mean 100% growth, 50%. Whatever that growth is, you need to have the plan to make it happen and show people that you had that plan, you reach that mark, and you move forward. It doesn't matter if you're a $500,000 business or a $50 million business. The general concepts work at all levels. So those are the three things that I think some people forget about and they should concentrate on.
I like that. It doesn't matter if you're 500K or 50 million. It's the fundamentals. And the sort of grand irony of a lot of this is those people, those operators that, aren't knowing how much money they're making, how much, profit they're making and things like that, sometimes in my experience are the ones who have like the most successful businesses because they're just heads down grinding, and they bring somebody in, they have to pay an arm and a leg to manage their books and fix everything. But in my experience, the type of individual that can build like a rocket ship business or like a just a high multiple valuation business is just not your average person that can sit there and look at the numbers and move them around, and they are just a unique individual. That's part of the beauty of this.
Steve, I have to say, I wasn't a financial guru, and I'm still not to this day. I understand what I need to know to read my balance sheet, to understand the P&L, to realize cause and effect, what was going on in my business. But I hired a really great controller, to provide the information to me and explain it to me in the way that made sense to me. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is sometimes when entrepreneurs are in a staid industry or what seems like a banal industry, like honestly, the payroll industry, you cut paychecks and you wire some money. It's like, it's not that complicated. Well, it's not that complicated. It's wildly complicated. The end result of you receiving that check doesn't look like a big deal, but the work and effort that actually goes in to do that properly for hundreds of thousands of people is monumental. And it takes a lot of creativity. Really good entrepreneurs have some sort of significant creativity in some part of their business, whether that be in sales and marketing, whether that be in operations, or finance. I had a little bit of each, but my creative genius, and everybody has one, was really connecting with people, and not only for my employees, but for my stakeholders, my business partners, and my clients. We talked about that at the top of the show. It's about that connection, and people want that connection. Even with all the AI in the world, I don't think the human connection is ever going to disappear. And those that do that well are going to have successful businesses, despite maybe even the industry that they're in.
I like that. And when it comes to, we talked a little bit about preparedness and really drilled into those 3 points. I'm curious to understand timing with when to sell. This is like a common question. It's probably the hardest question of them all, but everybody's different. Every chapter of people's lives is different. Every business is unique. But in your experience, what can you share about timing?
I've talked about this topic before, and I would call it seasons of your life. You know what I mean? Whether it's chapters, seasons, just a different way to look at it. And it is a very difficult question to answer because it truly is different for everyone. There's so many reasons to want to sell. People sell because they're burnt out. I highly recommend, even if you see a tinge of that, say, oh, I can hold on another 5 years because the business is going to be this. You might want to rethink that, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day how much money you get from that business if your life is miserable for 4 or 5 years because you're finding it a grind and painful to get up and go work every day. It causes the death of marriages. It causes challenges with your kids, your home life. It's hard enough to be an entrepreneur, but if you really don't want to be there, there's an opportunity to move on, because everybody sees it, whether you can only pretend for so long. So the number one thing is when you really feel that you don't want to do whatever it is anymore. Another thing that people really need to pay attention to is clearly the market trends. For example, in my industry, in the payroll and HR industry, normally when there was acquisitions done, these were very small companies, $1 million and $2 million, $500,000, and other small vendors were buying them up and merging. In fact, we did that several times to get to a bigger scale so the public companies would pay attention to us. So really watching the multiples in industry and attending industry events and speaking to your competitors and peers and having a great friendly relationship with them. So you talk about the big stuff, maybe not your internal strategy, but what's going on? What have you here? When was the last sale that we knew that we could figure out? Oh, that multiple was 3. I heard Joey down the block got 5 times revenue. Why did he get 5 times revenue? So it's paying attention to those market trends and saying now is the time. So there's a couple of reasons. And for my particular situation, it was a combination of both. It was my software was getting tired, and it would take a huge investment and big risk to potentially retool it all and continue in the business. I had spent most of my career doing it, and I was done. And the multiples were high in the industry. So I had a valuable property that people wanted to buy. I didn't particularly want to do it anymore. And I knew that it was the time. And it turned out to be the best decision that I ever made. And too many entrepreneurs wait too long holding on. I could tell you 100 stories. Someone says, I've got this $75 million company. Someone just offered me $250 million, and I know it's worth $1 billion. What happens 5 years later? That $75 million company is now worth $70 million. So you can always second guess the decisions that get made. At the end of the day, you're supposed to really literally make a pro and con type list and look at your specific situation and the real reasons and the real timing for selling. Just because the multiples are good might not be enough. You might want to make sure 2 or 3 factors are lining up, because we can talk about later, and I'm sure you're going to ask these questions, how I felt after I sold the business.
Yeah. That was actually where I was going next after valuation.
Sorry, Steve. I anticipated your every move.
With mistakes, I think that this is my favorite topic. Mistakes are like diamonds in the rough, basically, for listeners and people out there. What were some mistakes that you saw, that you see regularly in entrepreneurs that are going through this? And then after the fact, what could you retroactively look at and say, like, oh, I wish I would have done this part a little differently?
I think one of the mistakes that I made early on was pretending to be someone that I thought the clients wanted me and my company to be. And I struggled probably the first year. Even though our sales were good, I struggled giving clarity of who we were really supposed to be in the marketplace. And I was probably overly arrogant, and it came off as arrogant, like I'm a business owner and you should just do business with me because this is my business. And why would you do business with these public companies? Even with hiring people, I was like, it should be your pleasure to work for me. And then I changed my language to work with me. So a lot of it was internal mistakes that I made, trying to project this image of strength and success when I really didn't have it. Now, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be positive and you shouldn't have a positive attitude, but that whole concept of completely faking it till you make it, people see through that. And I found that I did not do a good job at the very beginning. And then I realized it was almost like an epiphany. People don't want to see who you want to be down the road. They want to see who you are. And then once I really started to be myself, I was a version of what I thought a leader should be. And it was wrong. It was wrong. And my staff told me by quitting. My clients told me by the way they communicated with me. And then I said, okay, this is not right. And I went back to my natural personality, which is what I should have done to begin with. And now there's this whole culture of, you being you, about being authentic. Well, I completely bombed that at the beginning of my career. So that was one of the biggest mistakes that I made that set me a little bit of adrift for a period of time. I don't know if that's an answer you've ever gotten before.
No,
maybe you were looking for a
great.
financial one or something else, but that's the one that mattered to me.
Yeah. And listening, I think, is a great skill that I struggle with. A lot of people always do, especially because you have to filter through advice and people all throwing things at you that aren't necessarily the most qualified people to be giving advice. And as an entrepreneur, you have to suss it out and see what the market brings back to you. So I really like that point of listening to customer feedback by how they communicate, employees by leaving, and like a retention rate and all of that. I think it is a fascinating topic. So let's talk about valuation next. This one comes up a lot. How do you put your best foot forward when you guys went to market? What did you focus on when it came to the buyer, and how did that first initial conversation start?
Well, I focused on the story. I told the story of who we were, where we came from, and how we got where we are at this point. That story is incredibly impactful because it shows not only the company's ability, but your ability to overcome challenges. And in our particular case, our client retention was significantly better than the industry average. And the industry averages usually come from the big multi-billion-dollar players who in general didn't do a great job at keeping clients because they had such massive sales forces they could sell through those losses. I couldn't do that. So I had to really work hard to keep a client longer. So our client, tracking our client attrition and making sure that all our books and records and the story was put together that they had very few questions. Like, well, I don't understand this, or why was this like this? No, you make that compelling story and argument through the presentation you prepare. Yes, was it in a deck format? Yes, it was, but it wasn't 120 pages long. It was probably 12 pages long, maybe 10 of really well thought out information on the way that I knew the buyer wanted to consume it. So you don't leave things for people's imagination. Well, if we leave this out, maybe they won't ask that. Oh, they'll ask it, or they'll wonder why you omitted it. So it's making sure that the story that you crafted, puts it in the light that the buyer would understand and want. When you're selling to public companies, it's different than potentially being bought by a much smaller competitor or merging with a non-like firm because they have different reasons for doing it. Public companies trade on their valuation and a multiple of their earnings, and they've got a PE ratio. They're plugging your financials and all of this stuff into their matrix, not the way that you might think as an entrepreneur. They're thinking like a public company, and they've got different needs, wants, and wishes. It's understanding what those needs, wants, and wishes are to get the biggest valuation.
I like that. And this is another good segue into PE versus venture or competitors, strategics. When it comes to sizing up buyers, you touched on it briefly there, but this is a good move into that area of when it comes time to sell. Let's say you're prepared, you got all your books in order. It's the time you feel it's right. How are you, when you have a list of LOIs in front of you, how are you figuring out the best approach? Like, how are you figuring out the best buyer when it comes forward?
That's a good question. In our instance of sale of my larger company, we had 3 or 4 suitors. Probably we had 4. And 2 of them were big public companies, and 2 of them were private equity. And what we did was we literally sat and discussed, myself and my business partner at the time, the gentleman who lent me the money to start the business, wasn't really active in the business, but very, very sharp and smart and understood how to help make these decisions. And for example, if you looked at some of the a PE offer, they wanted to buy, at least these particular deals didn't necessarily, they wanted you to stay on for a while, and they wanted some sort of earn-out situation over a period of time, so they didn't have to write you a big check. They gave you control, but not full day-to-day control, because they were spending a lot of money and they wanted the final say. And I couldn't live under those terms. For me, I knew me. There's no way I could work for that, because basically that's what it was. Regardless of whatever they told me and their track record, I knew for me, unless the number was outlandishly better than a public company who literally wrote a check and said, give me 30 days and you're gone. For me, those were the big determining factors: how long I might need to hang on, how quickly they were going to pay me. I might have ultimately made more money working with a private equity firm, but it would require a lot more continued effort most of the time. And as I told you before, one of the factors was I was done. I knew mentally I was done. So even if they offered me a lot more, I probably wouldn't have done it. Now, other people would have taken the money. They would have said, I got to put 2 more years into it. Yeah, but what if it didn't work? You put a huge risk out there with your life work. Even if you have the capability to do it, and you told yourself that you were 1 foot out the door, now you're going to all magically, all of a sudden mentally be like, oh, I'm all in now because I'm going to make another X amount of $1 million. I don't think your brain really works that way. I think it's hard to compartmentalize, being able to shift your mindset when you're truly deep down ready to move on. So those were huge factors with me in the decision-making process. And the 2 public companies gave wildly different offers. One was a tiered one where it was all based on client retention, and the multiple got higher the more clients you retained. Okay, seems cool. We know our client retention. But I also know that when this particular public company buys, they lose 20 to 30% of the clients because they just jam it in their system. And that's part of their business model. So even though their multiple was much higher, I had industry knowledge to say that's not a good deal. Even if I was there every minute of the waking hour, it wasn't going to be as good. So I ended up going with a company that gave me less of a multiple, better than industry average, and wrote a check. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of how that transpires or how you go about making a decision. The hard part when I did this was I knew that over the last 20 years, I took those clients from these public competitors that they didn't love that much. So that did weigh on me. I didn't do anything different than others did in this industry, but it wasn't just like, great, I'm going to take the money and retire and this is going to be awesome. I knew that I was going to disappoint some people, that had come to know, trust, and like me. Most people understood, but I got a few nasty emails like, how could you do this? And it's, that was not easy to take after working my butt off for many years when there was some negativity. So you can't anticipate everybody's going to be like, great, Rob, I'm glad. At the end of the day, most of your clients that you don't have direct personal relationships don't really care that you made X amount. They just want their payroll or whatever the service is to be done well, handled properly, and they don't want any inconvenience. When you sell your business, there's probably going to be an inconvenience to your customer.
Well said. Very well said. I like that. The grinding for 20 years and then getting nasty emails can't make everybody happy. You can't do it. It's impossible. And I do like sort of the theme of our conversation around opportunity cost of selling currently and thinking about the future of your mental state. If you're burned out, you're ready to go, not waiting 5 years and things fall apart if you're miserable of something that you've built and it's literally like kind of you're chained to it, it feels like. And it resonates with me. I know it resonates with a lot of people listening to this, especially when we think about it in just business terms, like opportunity cost of selling today versus 5 years from now. I think that's really really well articulated in this episode. So that takes us to the finale. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell Rob 10 years ago?
That is a very interesting question. And I've been asked that before, and I don't know that I answer it the same way every time because, what I noticed as you mature or get older, I don't know how much more mature I am than I was, a few years ago. But the truth is, your perspective changes. And my perspective out of, not running a significant concern for a handful of years and turning my life into something different gives me kind of a new way to kind of look back. I would say that I wouldn't be so rough with relationships that I had in the marketplace. I was tough. I was a no holds barred, I want to win kind of guy. And that's tiring. It's tiring and it's draining. And even though I had wonderful, fantastic relationships, sometimes it got in the way of my true happiness because of my personality trait. And I've worked really hard to soften the way that I communicate in certain instances because I had the choice and the decision now to turn my behavior and become the person that I want to be for the next decade and hopefully the rest of my life. Now, I realize some people listening is like, well, you had to be that way because that's what I don't know. I don't know that I had to be that way. It worked, and it clearly worked financially. But I think there is a different way to go about running your life and the way you do business. Like you look at a guy like Gary Vaynerchuk. It's all about, love, harmony, and being kind to other people. And it is something that I took really seriously to kind of have a look at myself and say, I can do this in a slightly different way than I did it before with the same skills and resources I have, just maybe a little softer. So that's throwing myself under the bus a little bit, but you know what? I don't care. At the end of the day, if you're not growing as a human being, I'm not sure what the point is of getting up every day.
Yeah.
So that's my answer for today anyway.
Well said. Well said. And for everybody listening, I totally agree with Rob on the kindness piece. I always tell people, like, don't mistake kindness for weakness. You can totally lead with being kind all across the board, employees, customers, everyone. I think it's a truly a superpower if you can do it, if you can really just look inward and go for it. It is very tricky, but I've had experience in this as well, and I like that you brought that up. Isn't something that we talk about a lot on the pod, but I really like that. So those are all the questions that I have for you, but what are you working on now, and where can people learn more about it?
Well, after I took a few years off to kind of decompress and get my head straight, which when you sell your business, in some ways it's almost like the loss of a family member because your identity was tied to it. So I struggled for a bit, to kind of figure out what my next play was. And by the way, that was another mistake I made. I wasn't really prepared for the next thing, right away, or didn't have an idea of what I wanted to do. So I took a few years to figure that out. And I said, what was I really good at in my career? What were the main reasons why the company was successful? And a lot of it comes back to, I think, the way that I was able to make decisions. And what I found that a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners think they're good at making decisions for the right reasons, but they're not. And that sometimes causes the death of a business. So what I ended up doing was I went back and I got my coaching certification to help other entrepreneurs make better decisions to not only grow their businesses, but to grow themselves personally. And I've taken clients on in that area, for the last handful of years. But in the last 6 months, I really found the thing that I believe is going to be, my passion and something that I think that is going to be very successful because it's already shown significant success in a very short period of time. The other thing that I think I did really well was personally brand myself outside of my company name. So we are now helping entrepreneurs and leaders specifically on LinkedIn, and we'll use the other socials if we need to, how to use the power of LinkedIn to make their brand come alive, to help them with their relationships with their stakeholders, to help them with their centers of influence, and help them attract new employees and potential new clients. And what I've seen is small and medium-sized businesses, the majority of them don't really understand how important their voice is, how important their image is in their marketing, especially in today's world. I know people have talked about this for the last 5 or 6 years, but if you're not using the full power of LinkedIn and you've got thousands of connections, I have a new client that has 17,000 connections, never did anything with. What? And the minute we started working with them, all of a sudden people started thinking about him, calling him, talking to him. He knew he should have been doing it. He knew it. I don't have the time. I'm busy with other things. And it's literally going to change the face of his business. So I took on a partner, a young gentleman named Brett Wood, who's a designer and also went to film school. So we know how to do the designs. And I help with the creative aspect of building the brands. And I absolutely love it. Now, here's the best part. I'm not working 40 hours a week. You know, I'm working, I take the clients that I want, the ones that I know they're going to be good, and Brett handles the typical day-to-day. And it is a perfect division of labor. He understands, because of his age, he's 25 years old, really how to make those images to come alive and how to use the social networks to their fullest extent. And I know how to communicate with the business owners about why this is important. And while I do the sales and marketing end, he does the execution. And it's like a wonderful thing for me because I get to mentor a smart young professional that cares about the work. Not to mention, he's probably making more money now in his first year doing this than he would have working for somebody else. And it's exciting to see somebody do well. And you can see it, how I'm excited about, honestly, more helping him, I think, than anything else. So it's pretty cool. So that's what I'm working on now. And you can reach it at robbasso.com. It's very simple, ROBBASSO. And the name of my company is Basso on Business. And I also do public speaking. I do this all over the country. So if you've got an event and you want to get people charged up on different topics, I've spoken at universities all across the country and business events, and I welcome the opportunity, and I don't mind traveling.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, the links that Rob mentioned will be in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your wisdom, Rob.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.